I came home from work 2 hours early on a Wednesday afternoon, and through my own unlocked front door, a door I had bought the deadbolt for myself at a hardware store on Maple Street 3 years before Sam ever walked through it, I heard my mother-in-law's voice before I saw anything at all. "Sam," she said, sharp and low and certain, the way you speak to someone who already knows they're wrong. "Get down. This is someone else's apartment." The sentence landed in me like a stone dropped into still water, slow and heavy and spreading outward. It was, I realized much later, the first genuinely honest thing Brenda had ever said in my presence. And it was the thread that, when I began to pull it, unraveled everything. She had said someone else's apartment, not Clara's apartment, not your wife's home, someone else's. As if I were a faceless stranger, an inconvenience, a temporary obstacle in a plan that had been in motion long before I arrived back that afternoon with my bag on my shoulder and a headache behind my eyes and absolutely no idea what I was walking into. The fact that she had said it to correct Sam, not to defend me, but to caution him against being caught, did not occur to me until later. In the moment, I only understood one thing. My mother-in-law knew exactly whose apartment this was, and she had chosen to be in it anyway, and she had not been alone. Let me go back to the beginning, because this story does not make sense without it, and because I want to be precise about what I had before I understood what was being taken. My name is Clara, and I was 33 years old that Wednesday in October, and I had been living in apartment 4B of the Rowan Street building for 8 years. I had moved in at 25, fresh from a badly underpaid research position, carrying 3 boxes of books and a second-hand sofa that had taken 2 friends and a borrowed van to maneuver up the narrow stairwell. The apartment was not large. A living room, a narrow kitchen, a bedroom that fit a queen bed and a dresser, and not much else. A bathroom with hexagonal tile I had thought was charming until I discovered the grout was impossible to keep clean. But it had south-facing windows, which meant light from mid-morning through late afternoon, a quality that transformed an ordinary rental into something that felt built with intention, with warmth in mind. I had fallen in love with those windows the moment the landlord first unlocked the door. I had signed the lease the same day. Over the years, I had made the apartment mine in all the ways that renters do, slowly, carefully, within the limits of what the building allowed. I had painted the walls a warm white that cost me 3 weekends and 2 gallons of primer to cover the previous tenant's aggressive taupe. I had installed curtain rods myself with a drill borrowed from my neighbor Marcus in 3A, who had watched my first attempt with visible concern before quietly taking over. I had found the kitchen table at an estate sale, a heavy pine thing with shallow gouges along one edge that I had sanded down and oiled until they looked intentional. I had arranged and rearranged the bookshelf, a wide floor-to-ceiling unit assembled over the course of a long and moderately profane Sunday, until the books and plants and photographs sat in the specific order that meant this space belonged to me and no one else. Every surface in that apartment had been argued with, negotiated, held in place by 8 years of daily life. It was not a large space, but it was mine in the way that few things in my life had ever been fully mine, and I understood the precise weight of that word. I met Sam at a birthday dinner for a mutual friend in the spring, 4 years before that Wednesday. He was 35, a structural engineer, quiet in the way of people who think before they speak, a quality I found unusual and then increasingly attractive after years of dating men who filled silence with noise. Sam had dark hair going slightly gray at the temples and hands that were always a little rough, and he listened when I talked in the specific way of someone who was actually listening rather than waiting for his turn. We dated for a year before he moved in. I told him clearly and without apology that this was my apartment and he was coming into it as my partner, not as a co-owner, and that if that arrangement ever needed to change, it would require a real conversation, not just a gradual accumulation of his things in my closet. He said he understood. He said he would never want it any other way. He brought 2 bags of clothes, a box of engineering textbooks, a coffee grinder he was evangelical about, and a temperamental snake plant he called Gerald. For 2 years before the wedding, it was exactly what I had hoped it would be. Brenda I had met at a Sunday lunch, 3 months into the relationship. She was 64, a retired school administrator, silver-haired and precise, with the posture of a woman who had spent decades being the most prepared person in the room. She was polite to me in the particular way of someone reserving judgment, the surface completely correct, the interior completely withheld. She asked appropriate questions about my work, and when I mentioned I had been in the Rowan Street apartment for 4 years by that point, she had nodded and said, "You must be very attached to it." Not "how lovely," not "that must feel like home." You must be very attached to it. I had filed the remark in the small mental drawer I kept for things that were not quite right, but not yet worth examining, poured more wine, and moved the conversation forward. In the 2 years Sam and I lived together before we married, Brenda remained at the correct distance. She visited on holidays, called Sam on Sunday evenings, and brought food when she came, the kind of abundant food that required 2 people to carry, a casserole in a dish wrapped in a tea towel, a cake under a glass dome, a bag of citrus from a tree in her garden that she mentioned several times. She was not warm to me in the way I might have hoped, but she was not hostile. She occupied the middle ground of someone who had not yet decided what I was, or who was waiting to see how things developed before committing to an opinion. I told myself this was normal. I told myself she would come around. We got married in June, on a Saturday, in the garden of a rented farmhouse 40 minutes outside the city. 38 people, which was the precise number we could afford and still feed well. I wore my grandmother's earrings, small seed pearls in a gold setting, and Sam wore a gray suit he'd wrinkled by falling asleep in the car on the way to the tailor's fitting. Brenda sat in the front row in a dove-gray dress and watched the ceremony with her hands folded in her lap and an expression I could not quite read from where I stood. Afterward, she hugged Sam for a long time and then turned to me and said, "Well, here we are." I told her I was glad she was there. She said, "Yes," and patted my hand once and went to find her seat at the reception. I watched her walk away and told myself again that she would come around. The first change came in the months after the wedding, and it was in how Brenda talked about the apartment. Before, when she visited, her interest in the space had been the ordinary interest of a guest. Peripheral, polite, the kind of glance that is really just the eyes resting somewhere neutral. After the wedding, something shifted. She began to ask questions. Not intrusive questions, not at first. Nothing you could point to and call inappropriate, but specific in a way that casual curiosity rarely is. "What does the lease say about subletting?" she asked once over dinner at her house, while Sam was in the kitchen opening wine. I said I wasn't sure, since I had no reason to sublet. She said a friend of hers had had a situation with her daughter's lease, and it ended up being complicated. "I just think these things are worth knowing," she said. I told her I was sure it was fine. She said, "Of course, dear, of course," and I let it go. Another time, 6 weeks later, at our dining table while Sam was on the phone in the bedroom, Have you and Sam thought about what would happen to the apartment if one of you were incapacitated? Legally, I mean. Who has authority? I said we hadn't discussed it in those terms. You should, she said. It's just responsible planning. These things get very messy without the right documents in place. I mentioned it to Sam later that evening, and he said his mother had always been a planner. She just wanted to make sure we were taken care of. I said it felt a little strange to bring up incapacitation over dinner. He said, "That's just how she talks. Don't read too much into it." I let it go because I was a person who believed in the kindness of explanations, and because I was not yet the person I would eventually have to become. The phone calls started in September. I would come home from work and Sam would be in the kitchen or the bedroom with his phone to his ear, speaking in a tone I can only describe as managed, lower than his usual voice, more careful, the particular quality of a person conducting a negotiation they have not disclosed. When I came into the room, he would glance up and finish within a minute or two. And when I asked who it was, he would say his mother, and when I asked what they'd been talking about, he would say various things, all plausible, all offered with the easy fluency of someone who had been preparing for the question. I noticed that he almost never had these calls in front of me. I noticed that the conversations always ended quickly when I entered the room. I noticed that afterward he would be slightly too attentive, slightly too easy, the way people are when they are compensating for something. I told myself I was overreading it. I had always been good at telling myself that. Then, in early October, 2 weeks before the Wednesday, I came home to find something on the kitchen notepad. Not Sam's handwriting. Brenda's. The angular, compressed script of someone who had corrected thousands of students' papers and developed a penmanship that was efficient above all else. A phone number I didn't recognize, and below it, in Sam's hand, 3 words. Not yet. Wait. I stood at the counter for a long moment, looking at those 6 words total, a number and a response, and something cold moved through me. Slow and certain, the way cold moves through water when the temperature drops. I photographed the notepad with my phone. I put it back exactly where I had found it. I said nothing when Sam came home an hour later, because I had already learned, without quite knowing I had learned it, that the best way to find out what someone is hiding is to let them believe it is still hidden. That was 2 weeks before the Wednesday. On the Wednesday itself, I left for work at the usual time, kissed Sam at the door, sat through 2 meetings, and developed the kind of headache that lives specifically at the junction of the skull and the top of the neck. By 2 p.m, I had decided the 3rd meeting could be managed by my colleague Priya, who was better at it anyway, and I packed my bag and drove home through mid-afternoon traffic with the radio low and the windows cracked, and no particular sense that anything about this day was different. The front door was unlocked. I noticed it. I always locked it when I left, a habit built over 8 years of city living. But I was tired and my head hurt, and I turned the handle and stepped inside, and the familiar amber light of the afternoon fell across the hall runner and the coat hooks and the small table where I kept my keys and my mail, all of it exactly as I had left it that morning. And then from the living room, clear and aimed like something thrown with precision, I heard Brenda's voice. "Sam, get down. This is someone else's apartment." I walked through the doorway. Sam was on my stepladder, the folding aluminum one I kept in the hall closet behind the winter coats, balanced near the top of my bookshelf with both hands occupied. He was holding something small and brass-colored. There was a screwdriver on the top shelf beside him and a small plastic bag of wall anchors on the floor at the ladder's base, and a section of my books had been shifted sideways to clear a space against the wall. Brenda was standing in the center of my living room in her navy blazer, one hand raised toward Sam in the gesture of someone directing traffic. Neither of them had heard me come in. The dust motes floated in the amber light. The refrigerator hummed from the kitchen. Somewhere below on the street, a car alarm started and stopped. None of us moved. Then Sam turned his head and saw me. The expression that crossed his face was one I had never seen on him before. Alarm, then guilt. Then the particular deflation of a man who has been running from something and has run out of road. Not surprise. He was not surprised. That was the thing I would return to later in the sleepless hours. He was not surprised. He had been expecting this. He had been dreading this. And those are not the same thing. "Clara," he said. "Just my name. Nothing after it." Brenda turned around slowly. Not with alarm, not with guilt, but with the practiced composure of a woman who has been interrupted many times and has decided that interruption is a minor inconvenience and not a moral event. Her hands were at her sides. Her blazer was smooth. Her silver bob was perfectly set. She looked at me with those pale, measuring eyes and said, "Clara, you're home early." "Yes," I said. My voice came out level. "What is happening in my apartment?" Sam climbed down from the ladder, one careful step at a time, holding the brass key hook. He turned to face me and did not put it down. I don't think he knew what to do with his hands, and the hook was simply the thing that was in them. Brenda looked between us with an expression of patient concern, the kind a mediator wears when they have already decided how the meeting should end. Outside the window, the amber light deepened into the first edge of evening gold. "We were just making a small improvement," Brenda said before Sam could speak. "A key hook, near the bookshelf where it's convenient. You don't have one anywhere near the door, and it seemed practical." She paused and tilted her head slightly. "I noticed it on my last visit." "Your last visit," I said slowly. "When was that?" Another silence. Sam looked at the key hook in his hand. Brenda's expression held, precise and patient and utterly composed. She said, "I stop in sometimes when I'm in the neighborhood. It's no different than any family member visiting." Something in my chest shifted, not a sudden collapse, but the long, slow shift of a structural thing that has been under too much weight for too long and has finally reached its limit. "How often?" I asked. "Clara," Sam began. "I'm asking your mother," I said. "How often do you come here when I'm not home?" Brenda set her hands together in front of her, that composed administrative posture, and recalibrated behind her eyes. She was deciding how much to give me. How much she had to give me, now that I was standing here with the door open at my back. "Perhaps once a week," she said. "Sometimes twice." Once or twice a week. I had been at work, in meetings, on calls, eating lunch at my desk and managing headaches and driving home through traffic, while my mother-in-law had been moving through my apartment as if she had every right to. And Sam had given her that right. Sam, who had kissed me goodbye every morning and poured my coffee and lain beside me in the dark. Sam had given his mother access to my home without telling me. For how long? With what key? Toward what end? My hands were shaking. I noticed it from a slight distance, the way you notice things in extreme moments, the fine tremor in my fingers, the way my bag felt suddenly very heavy on my shoulder. I set it down on the floor carefully and straightened and looked at my husband. He was still holding the brass key hook. His knuckles had gone white around it. "How long," I said, "has your mother had a key to this apartment?" He opened his mouth. He closed it. He looked at the key hook. He did not look at me. "Sam." 8 months, he said. 8 months, I said. The words sat in the air between us, heavy and strange. 8 months was last February through this October, the whole of last winter and spring and summer, Sam getting up every morning and kissing me goodbye, while his mother was using a copy of my key to move through my home in the hours between. You gave your mother a key to my apartment 8 months ago and didn't tell me. Our apartment, Sam said. The words were so precisely wrong, they required a moment of genuine attention. His name was not on the lease. We had discussed this clearly and in good faith, more than once. I had been careful about it not out of cruelty, but because anything built over 8 years of solitary, careful work deserves to be called by its right name. My name is on the lease, I said very quietly. It has been on the lease for 8 years. You know that. I just meant... I know what you meant. Brenda cleared her throat. That small, decisive sound designed to collect the energy in a room and redirect it. I think, she said in the tone of someone chairing a difficult meeting, that we're all getting a little heated over something quite simple. Sam wanted to do something thoughtful, and I came to help, and you came home earlier than expected. That's all this is. She tilted her head. Perhaps if we all sat down... I don't want to sit down, I said. She looked at me. The smile didn't waver, but something did. Something behind it, in those pale, measuring eyes, something that tightened briefly and then loosened, controlled and deliberate, the way a fist opens when it decides the moment hasn't come yet. I had never seen it before because I had never stood directly in her way before, and in that fraction of a second I understood. She was not merely difficult, not merely possessive in the way of a certain kind of mother who has never learned where her child ends and she begins. She had a plan. She had been running it for 8 months, possibly longer, and she had never expected me to come home at 2:30 on a Wednesday afternoon and find her standing in the middle of it. I want her to leave, I said to Sam, right now, and I want her key. He nodded, not with argument or protest, but with the dull, braced compliance of a man who had been expecting this reckoning and had been hoping, indefinitely, for later. Always later. He held out his hand to his mother. After a pause long enough to make clear she was choosing to comply rather than being compelled, Brenda placed a key on his palm. A Yale key, brass, with a small orange plastic sleeve I had bought in a pack of 4 at my hardware store 3 years ago. My hardware store, my key pack, my sleeve. She left with her blazer and her composure arranged perfectly around her, and when the door closed, the apartment felt different, as if something that had been holding itself at a controlled tension had finally, imperceptibly, released. Sam sat on the sofa and put his hands between his knees and stared at the floor. He looked, suddenly and completely, very young. Not in any way that softened my fury, but in the specific way people look young when the story they've been telling about themselves collapses and what's left underneath is just a person who made a decision they can't undo. Start from the beginning, I said. All of it. He told me a version. Brenda had asked about the apartment one evening on the phone. She had wanted to stop in sometimes, to feel connected to our life. He had made a copy of my key without telling me because it had seemed like a small thing, a kind thing. He'd always meant to tell me. He had worried I would read too much into it. He said he was sorry. He said all the correct things in the correct order with the correct amount of remorse. And when he finished, I thought, with a clarity that was almost clinical, this is not the full version. What was the key hook for? I asked. He looked up. Your mother doesn't drive 40 minutes to install a key hook, I said. What was it for, Sam? specifically. He rubbed the back of his neck. She wanted a place to keep her own key, so it was always here, in case she needed it. In case she needed it for what? He didn't answer. I looked at the bookshelf, the shifted books, the cleared space near the top, the precise height of it, well above where I naturally reached. And then I thought of the hall closet. Someone had known the ladder was there. I walked to the bedroom. I opened the filing cabinet and looked at the box labeled Current Year. It had a slight gap at the front edge, the gap of something lifted and replaced carefully, but not precisely. The folder inside marked Lease/Landlord Correspondence had been placed back with its tab facing the wrong way. I never did that. I was particular about exactly that kind of thing. I stood in my bedroom with the folder in my hands and felt the floor tilt beneath me. Slowly, nauseatingly, the way the ground moves when what you believe to be solid reveals itself as something else entirely. Brenda had read my lease. She had noted what she needed, photographed what she wanted, and put it back nearly perfectly. She had done it in my home, in my silence, in my absence, twice a week for 8 months. I walked back to the living room and set the folder on the coffee table next to the key hook. Sam looked at it. He did not claim ignorance. He did not perform surprise. He looked at it the way a person looks at something they have been trying not to look at directly, and the quality of that look, careful, avoidant, already acquainted with the shape of it, told me everything I needed to know. "You knew she was doing this," I said. "I didn't know she was going through your files, but you knew she was building something." My voice was still level. Inside, something had gone very cold and very clear, like winter water. Still on the surface, moving fast below. "What has she been planning, Sam?" He was quiet for a long time, long enough that I counted the seconds without meaning to. Then he said, "She wants to be on the lease." I sat down, pulled the chair from the corner, and sat in it and waited, because I could tell there was more and I needed all of it before I responded to any of it. It came in pieces, the way bad news always comes when someone has been holding it too long and the seams finally give. Brenda had been thinking about selling her house. The market was good. It was too large for one person. She had wondered whether there might be a way to formalize an arrangement where she could stay in the apartment sometimes. She had looked at the lease. Yes, Sam admitted. She had looked at the lease. He had told her the file existed, but had not told her to read it, though he had not told her not to either. And she had noted a building provision for adding a named long-term occupant with landlord approval. She had made preliminary inquiries. "She contacted my landlord," I said. "She just asked some general questions. She contacted my landlord." I said it again plainly, no softening, no careful framing. "Your mother went through my private files, extracted information from my lease, called my landlord about adding herself as an occupant, and you gave her the key to make it all possible. And you said nothing to me." He opened his mouth. He said he had thought that if she saw how settled we were, she would realize it wasn't worth pursuing. He said the situation would have resolved itself. He said he had been trying to keep the peace. The peace. I had been the peace, I realized. I had been the thing he was keeping it at the expense of, quietly and consistently for 8 months. I picked up my phone and called Nadia. She answered on the second ring. I told her what had happened. She was quiet through all of it. Nadia, who was never quiet. And when I finished, she said without hesitation, "Don't touch anything. Photograph everything exactly as it is, and call your landlord tonight, before she does." That night, I worked at the kitchen table the way my father taught me. methodically, without panic, from the facts outward. I called my landlord's voicemail and left a message requesting an urgent callback. I photographed the filing box, the misplaced tab, the cleared space on the bookshelf. I wrote down everything Sam had told me in order, noting the gaps and what the gaps suggested. My landlord called at 7 the next morning. His name was Paul, a dry, efficient man in his 60s, and he confirmed it immediately. A woman had called in late August asking about occupancy policies, and again in September, asking specifically about adding a named occupant. She had described herself as practically family. He had assumed I was aware. I asked if he would put that in writing. He said yes without hesitation, and I thanked him and hung up and sat in the early morning light with my cold coffee and allowed myself, for the first time since the afternoon before, to feel the full weight of it. Not just the betrayal, the blindness, the careful, deliberate blindness I had practiced for months, choosing the kindest possible explanation for every sharp edge, rather than asking what the edges were for. That grief sat in my chest like something physical, and I breathed around it and let it become something I could use. Nadia came on Saturday with coffee and her laptop. She laid it out clearly. A tenant's rights attorney, locks changed today, all documentation preserved. And then she looked at me over her coffee cup and said, "Clara, what do you actually want to happen?" I knew I had known it somewhere in the cold, clear hours of the night before. I wanted it on the record. I wanted Brenda to understand with the precision that only legal language can provide that what she had done was not an excess of maternal enthusiasm. It was a coordinated attempt to access and leverage my private property, and it was going to have consequences. I changed both locks that afternoon. I scheduled a consultation with an attorney named David Ferris for Tuesday. I composed a formal email to my landlord confirming our conversation and requesting documentation of both of Brenda's calls. He provided it within the hour. Then I sat down with Sam at the kitchen table and told him all of this, calmly and completely. He listened. He said he was sorry. He said he hadn't known it had gone as far as it had, which I believed in part, and did not believe in the parts that mattered most. He said he loved me. I told him I knew that, and that love was not the issue, and that what happened next depended entirely on what he was willing to do about what had already happened. "Call your mother," I said. "Tell her this is finished, that she has no standing in this apartment, no claim on it, no access to it, and that any further contact with my landlord will be addressed through legal channels, and do it while I'm sitting here." He picked up the phone. He called Brenda. She answered on the first ring. The bright, precise voice of a woman expecting a manageable conversation, Sam told her, more clearly than I had expected, without the softening he had always arranged between them. He told her that what she had done was a violation of his wife's privacy. He told her the locks had been changed. He told her about the attorney. His voice was level throughout. When she said, "I suppose Clara has been very persuasive," he said, "This has nothing to do with persuasion. These are my words." When she said they would speak when he had time to think clearly, he said, "I have thought clearly. That's what this is." And then, for the first time in the dynamic I had been watching for 3 years, he ended the call himself and put his phone face down on the table. We sat in the quiet for a moment. The afternoon light came through the south-facing windows and laid itself across the pine table, and the coffee cups and the yellow notepad with my handwriting on it. David Ferris reviewed the documentation on Tuesday with the focused efficiency of someone who had seen every variation of this situation. He sent a formal cease and desist letter to Brenda that Friday. Precise, documented, legally unambiguous. I never heard from her directly again. It is March now, 5 months since that Wednesday in October. The south-facing windows still fill the apartment with amber light from mid-morning onward. The bookshelf is back in my arrangement. The stepladder is behind the winter coats where it belongs. I painted the kitchen sage green in January, and Sam helped with the second coat, and we worked mostly in silence. The easy kind that comes after hard things have been said and survived. The key hooks are by the door, where they should be, both keys accounted for. Both of us in agreement about who holds them and why. Some things you earn twice. The first time with labor and years of ordinary accumulation. The second time with the willingness to look directly at what is happening in your own life and call it what it is, without softening it into something easier to hold. I earned this apartment the first way a long time ago. I earned it the second way on a Wednesday in October, standing in amber light with my hands shaking, choosing finally to be the kind of person who does not look away. I'm still that person. I intend to stay her.